Okay, today's lesson we're going to be looking at the history of the study of anatomy and physiology. So how do we know the things that we know? When did we figure these out in our historic timeline? Spoiler alert, some of these discoveries were much more recent than you think they are, and modern medicine has come a long ways from antiquity. So when we're looking at the study of anatomy and physiology, we got to start back kind of pre-Roman medicine. Okay, so before the Romans, what did and I should say there's going to be a lot of healthcare ties in this because anatomy and healthcare are tied very closely together as we've studied them. Especially in the early times, we studied anatomy and physiology in order to make healthier people and so forth, as we still kind of do. But before the Romans, okay, so pre-Roman medicine, anatomy and healthcare in general was performed by priests. All right, they didn't have doctors, they didn't have medicine, so to speak. They did have some rudimentary things, but that was a task in a lot of cultures that fell upon the priests, the healing and those kind of things. It was very spiritual, so it was tied to your favor with the gods or demons or whatever, and so it was viewed as a spiritual process. They used magic, but some of that magic ended up being some herbal remedies that hold up true till today. All right, there's willow bark has aspirin in it, and the Native Americans figured that out early that had some healing qualities, and so some of the herbal remedies were effective, and they didn't know why they were effective, but they thought they were communicating with the gods in a way. So kind of in antiquity there. As we move up to the Greeks, we have Hippocrates. All right, maybe you've heard of the Hippocratic Oath. That is something that all doctors still take today, and it's named after Hippocrates, which was 2,500 years ago is when he lived, and he's considered the father of medicine from a Western tradition standpoint. Like I said, doctors today still take the Hippocratic Oath. His belief in medicine and what he preached was health is an equilibrium. So it's a balance of a variety of body systems, and that holds true today, that your health is related to a homeostasis of a variety of things going on inside of your body. Now, he didn't understand exactly what those things were, but he had a belief that the imbalance of these things were what would cause diseases. So we have an individual here that's looking at imbalance in physiological features leading to disease, which is a big step forward from thinking that you did something to make the gods mad. And so he tied those humors to the original ancient elements of earth, air, water, and fire. He tied those with his four humors, he called them, which would be yellow bile, blood, phlegm, black bile, and thought that they corresponded to the seasons and all those kind of things. So you can still see some religious undertones, some spiritual undertones with that as he's looking at that. His kind of main features there was that it was a patient-oriented medical treatment, and he favored a regimen, not drugs. And so these are all things that are phenomenal for us today and pay off dividends. Proper diet, enough sleep, exercise, right living to alter disease process, athletic training, all those things are things that we still know today that helps balance your internal homeostasis, and it cures a lot of ailments just by having that balance in there. And so that was his diagnoses usually involved prescribing better diets and workouts and so forth there. So here's a chart that kind of correlates, and you can kind of see with the seasons and the astrological signs and the biles and having all those things hooked together. And so that's Hippocrates. And so you can understand that balance of health. Now, did he know a lot of anatomy? No, absolutely not. But he had it figured out that our bodies needed that homeostasis that we know so well today. Roman medicine, so fast forward another couple hundred years and into ancient Rome, and we have some early Claudius Galen, so Galen of Pergamum is our most notable figure in ancient Roman medicine. And then he actually did some anatomical sketches. So he looked at human bodies, usually, maybe some soldiers on the battlefield or some criminals that had been executed, and would sketch the internal structures and anatomy. Now, if you look at these sketches, they leave a little something to be desired. It may be good for 2,000 years ago, but I don't know if I'd want my doctor learning his anatomy off of a sketch like that as he's doing some kind of a surgery on me. Shockingly, Galen of Pergamum, his practices went on for thousands of years, or a couple thousand years. He had a massive amount of writings and textbooks. He's very opinionated. He didn't tolerate people calling him out, and even after his death, his word was gospel, and really you weren't allowed to call out his practices. And so for hundreds of years, up until the 1500s, we were using books with these kind of anatomical sketches for doctors and those being trained in medicine. All right. Now we have to think, like, why is this? Okay, so why don't we have better sketches at the time? Keep in mind the dissection process back then was viewed to be very sacrilegious. All right, so with their religious beliefs and the afterlife, they thought dissecting a human being was a fate worse than death, and so they didn't look inside to study those kind of things. Da Vinci did. Now, Leonardo da Vinci in the late 15th century was the first artist to do some in-depth dissections and drawings. Now, he never published these, fear of the backlash that would come with that. And there's some great stories of, in the dead of the night, there'd be someone that had been tried and hung in the courtyard, and they would dissect his body, and he would make some sketches. Once again, it's still considered illegal in history to dissect a human, but we start to see some actual anatomical sketches and looking at those gross anatomy features with some accuracy for the first time. Once again, these weren't published. They weren't found out until after his death. The first one that does publish, and then really kind of where I think we start like our modern anatomy and physiology, is Andreas Vesalius. 1543. He published the Fabrica, and it was an incredible step forward in anatomy and physiology. Same thing. He was dissecting executed criminals, and maybe kind of an odd lifestyle. So what he would do, and he had dwarfism, and so he was a smaller person. At night, he would go out to the gallows as the criminals were still hanging there, and jump up and tear off a leg or pieces of them, and then take them back to his not apartment at the time, but his home, and dissect them and draw and study the muscles and things in the legs. Really thankful that he did that, and so we could move modern medicine forward. But definitely, it would be odd if you saw someone doing that today. And so he really led the way, and he went from sketches that we got from Galen like this to his sketches over here on our. Clearly, you can see the difference, and so really a huge step forward in the world of anatomy and physiology. And he also led the way of realizing, and doctors realizing, that, hey, human dissections are something that we need to study, and we have to learn how the human body works, kind of thing. Even up until the 20th century, so the 1800s, 1900s, it was still kind of a taboo thing to dissect a human being. And so it was always assumed that the person on the dissection table who was passed away was some kind of criminal. Here we can see an artist's rendition of dissection theater. And so in the 1800s, the professor would be doing a dissection in front of the students in the theater and calling out what's where as they looked onward and tried to learn where the different body parts are at. This led to an issue, though, because as doctors and healthcare professionals realized this was a very important thing, there were not enough criminal bodies for them to go and dissect and find. And so it takes a creepy and kind of twisted turn here. The demand for cadavers was so great, a lot of med schools and those kind of things were paying mass amounts of money. And so it led to more and more grave robberies, so people that would dig up freshly buried bodies and then sell them to med schools so they can dissect and learn where the human parts are. And even beyond that, even far worse fate is the famous case of Burke and Hare, where they had a boarding house, and one of the people in their apartment complex had passed away, and they donated her body, or they didn't donate, they sold her body to the local med school, and realized that they could make some money doing this. So they started to murder people and then sell their bodies to the local med schools. Crazy thing, right? Like, oh my gosh, like it was 1800s. They're essentially hitmen and selling them. They were caught. They were put down. But from that point on, how we kind of fix this is now we have donating your body to science. You guys have heard that before. And so we have the Uniform Anatomic Gift Act. It just came out in revised in 2006. It began in the 1960s. But now you can donate your body to science if you choose to do so. And so all of the dissection cadavers that people study are people who willingly donated their body to students like you guys that can learn the different parts. There's a very it's a very well thought out and intentional act. They take great lengths to make sure that the bodies are transported to different spots where they might not, they're going to be away from people that they could potentially know, or in those kind of cases. So there's still a lot of respect as they're treating them, but that help pave the way for organ donations and willing of sharing your bodies and those kind of things. So thankfully, we're in a much better spot, and you can see our medical advances have grown significantly. So here's an example of one from Body World in the exhibit, where they plastinate the human body so you can see all the different anatomical features. And if this is something you're interested in with the history of anatomy and those kind of things, I'd highly recommend Blood and Guts. It's a book, and it's about a 20-year-old documentary from the British Broadcasting Company. Both fantastic, where they talk about the history of how we knew about surgery, and we didn't even really get into a lot of the surgical procedures, but pretty barbaric back in the day what they had to do. And so I'm thankful to be alive now and have things like stitches and anesthesia and phenomenal medical care now. So great intro there on the history of how we've studied anatomy over the years, and maybe something we take for granted that we just can take a high school or a college class on it and do research, when way back in our ancestors' times, that was definitely not something that was available to them. So there you go, a little brief history of the study of anatomy and physiology. Next up, we're going to be looking at levels of organization as we kind of keep moving forward on this introduction to anatomy setup. If this is something that you find helpful, that you're enjoying, I always encourage to like that, to share it, find the video that works for you. We're going to keep working through the textbook. If there's some things that didn't hit that well, if there's things you have more questions about, feel free to leave them in the comments below, and I'd be happy to answer my best abilities.